So that's interesting because it's the whole package, and that is Germany. So maybe it's quite different from us, right? So what about Switzerland? What have you done to improve your road safety?
Well, listening to Peter's explanation of the trends and the developments, also the measures that were taken in Switzerland, it looks very, very similar. Even the figures that you mentioned with the number of road deaths, but also of injureds, heavy, seriously injured participants in road traffic have considerably diminished. I think they're about 9 times less in terms of road deaths today than they were in 1970, which was also the high point in our case. And I think we started to do measures which were preventive, of course, technical measures, road safety on the infrastructure, education was very, very important. But also repressive in a way. We had measures taken for high-speed accidents. We increased our fines. We enforced the fines as well, and we also did some more sort of semi-preventive repressive measures, which were in terms of security, safety control of vehicles, to make sure that vehicles. That, for example, bike riders not just wear a helmet, but that the helmet is actually a safe helmet and it's well attached. That cars function well. That they don't have brakes that fail and things like that. And in addition to all the measures that you have mentioned, that are being now taken by technology, and I think the latest developments that the industry is talking about is sort of self-guided cars. It will be a new development that I think has a big potential in reducing road deaths, but also serious injuries considerably. I think what's also important maybe that needs to be kept into account is pedestrians. I think pedestrians still comprise of a serious percentage of road deaths and injuries. And I think there, in our case, I don't know how it is in Germany or in Ireland, the proportion of reduction has actually been less successful. In absolute terms, they're not very high, but the reduction has been less successful. And one development that we have noticed as well, there is a new source of injury and death, which is electronic bikes. Electronic bikes, they have, there's a relatively recent phenomenon, but they provide high speed, little protected, and so far still not so regulated transport. And that's a new phenomenon that we are working with. Maybe just on the repressive or preventive repressive side, we have worked closely with the private sector, and there, especially with the insurance sector. I think there is a lot of expertise, a lot of interest by the insurance industry to minimize their premiums and their payouts when it comes to accidents, to road deaths, but also to, of course, injuries which sometimes have a much longer term impact, economic impact, and also human impact. Than just accidents that touch cars. So there I think education is very important. Measures, for example, to reduce the alcohol levels for young first-time drivers. Also re-education courses for young drivers and also for aging drivers. Health checks for them. There's also possibilities to put in, for example, drive control instruments that allow to monitor how drivers drive, and then depending on their driving habits, sort of adjust the premiums that they have to pay, and also, if there is an accident, to have regress to the accident causing party in case they really were intentionally driving fast and things like that. I think fines and implementation. Enforcement of sanctions is very, very important. I think it's not just fining people if they speed or if they drink with alcohol, of course, if they cause an accident. It's also road routines, that people stay in their lane, that there is not an unanticipated, chaotic, sort of haphazardous type of traffic flow, that traffic is more it's easier to anticipate. And there you don't need to have fines, but you have to sort of develop how should I say, a routine, a common standard. And I think that's something where in Europe we've achieved quite a lot as well, working together. And I think that's another thing. There's a wide cooperation, international cooperation as well, standardizing measures, coordinating, sharing best experience, best practices as well. I think there's a big potential there also to reduce the impact and to make our roads really safer for everybody who is participating.
So it's also the whole package as well in Switzerland,
Yes,
and it works very well there. And what about Ireland? Because Ireland, as I know, that you are the whiskey country, and then in terms of driving, Ireland can do it very well to prevent or to ensure the safety for the people.
Yes, thank you. I think our experiences are very similar to the German and the Swiss experiences. So I won't go over all of those issues again. But before I came here, I had a look at our statistics. We began to take statistics in 1958, and we peaked in terms of our deaths, very much like the Swiss experience and the German experience, in the 70s. The 70s seemed to be the worst time in Europe for traffic accidents, and we had 660 deaths in 1974, a little over 660 deaths. And we are now down around 160, 180. The reduction is not as great now as my colleagues here in Switzerland and Germany. And of course it's speeding, it's drink driving, it's the infrastructure on which the cars are being driven and the bikes are driving and the people are walking, and also the safety of vehicles, all of those issues. But I would say one of the biggest things for us was the cultural change. The fact that deaths at that level became unacceptable. I remember as a very young man reading the headlines in the paper, 5 dead, 6 dead, someone goes across a road straight through a wall, 4 dead. I remember one morning in my own little town, we woke up on a Sunday morning and 6 young people were dead in a car which had gone across a bridge at midnight the previous night. So we really had to address the culture of drinking and driving, the culture of speeding. And then of course the government had to deal with the infrastructure, build motorways, invest in safer cars. But that addressing of the culture was very difficult. It was very difficult for people to realize that they simply couldn't get into a car with a certain amount of alcohol in their bodies. And this was something that had been done for decades. And I remember the debates in Parliament, outside Parliament. What would happen to the older people who lived on the mountainsides? What would happen to the social life? And Ireland is very famous for its social life, and people live in villages. At the same time, we had this incredible carnage on the roads. So we really needed people to push the mothers who lost their sons and daughters, people who'd lost their sisters, their fathers, and it took a huge political effort that people began to accept it is not acceptable to drink and drive. And I can say really that didn't really happen until the 1990s. So we were accepting this carnage, this collateral damage in our society. So at some point we decided so far, no further. And we passed a lot of legislation, and the legislation had to be followed by enforcement. Without enforcement, it won't happen. So our accident statistics began to drop dramatically after about 2000. Now simultaneously, as my colleagues were saying, we had safer cars, we had better roads, we built a motorway system, and we began to reduce our speeds as well. So all of that package was happening at the same time. But the cultural change was the big thing, really. And as I live in Thailand and I see the accident statistics, the question is that raising headlines? Are people concerned? Are politicians concerned? Because until they're concerned, nothing will happen. Now I would also say, in the last 7 or 8 years, we've had certain years where we've gone back. We went to 160 deaths, which is still 160 too many, and then suddenly it was going back up again. With the recession in Ireland in 2008, 2009, 2010, I think enforcement was probably pulled back. We were cutting back on jobs, the number of police were cut a little bit. In general, maybe there was a certain lax attitude, and immediately the death rate begins to go up again. So we're looking at all of those. I think we've achieved an awful lot, but there's a long way to go. But I can definitely say the culture of drinking and driving in Ireland amongst young people is gone. Those actually, it's the older generation that are still linked into the past and think, well, look, I'm a middle-aged man, I drive carefully, I can drive with 2 or 3 whiskies, you know, that's easy for me to do. So we still have to enforce all the time, and we're doing that. We've made major strides, and we've reduced the death rate by 5 times. And in 1974, we had 500,000 cars on our roads. We have 2.25 million cars on our roads now, and our death rate is 5 times less. That's a real achievement, but it doesn't come easy, and there is pushback.
Right, I agree. So it's about political will, about the law enforcement, and what about the public participation in all your countries? I mean, the people are willing to follow the rules, right?
Well, I think this actually is what Brendan just said rightly. It's a question of culture. So there needs to be the concern also amongst the people to get this culture that yes, this enforcement is right. It has a reason, and I think this whole educational field where you get young people at school before they are even driving, they are already a participant in traffic. They need to be sensibilized for the danger, for the importance of their own behavior as a participant in this traffic, not only for their own sake and safety, but also for their responsibility for the safety of others. So I think education is definitely key to bring about this cultural change, to have it connotated positively, that when I have drunken, I leave my car there, I call a taxi, and I go home by taxi, and there are many more car sharing and all those possibilities today that make this much easier than in the past, and have this connotated positively. It is good when somebody after a party with friends says, no, I leave my car, I will come and pick up tomorrow, and not positively connotated that somebody is proud of having driven home with I don't know how many beers or whiskey or whatever.